Remember, you can get in touch with our Fearsome Foursome by emailing clubdubpodcast@mail.com and through Twitter, using the hashtag @clubdubpodcast.
Welcome to the
Club Dub Football Podcast,
where the only question is,
does your team make it into the club?
Can he get in? No, he cannot!
Hi and welcome to another episode of the Club Dub Football Podcast. I'm Rob Rose, and this week we're back after an unplanned hiatus to talk all things free agency as the final embers of that burn, but also to turn our attention to one of the most hotly anticipated NFL drafts in a very long time. With quarterback prospects like Trevor Lawrence headlining the players available, we'll break down where your team might be looking and what players might land in your roster in the weeks ahead. So, it's now time to be joined by PB, JB and Aldrin. So with so much to get to, let's get started.
Blitz. Darnold is able to stay upright. Wow, what a play by Darnold. Wanted to go down, still going. Inside the 10 for the touchdown. There are no flags, and that is all Sam Darnold.
So hi gents.
Hello, Rob.
Back talking all things NFL, and we couldn't have picked a more action-packed off-season week. I'm sure there'll be some quiet ones ahead. But as we head into this week, we'll be thinking not only about all things draft, but also talking about some of the blockbuster trades to get those high first-round picks, and also the trade that takes Sam Darnold out of New York and lands him somewhere near Charlotte. So, with all of the news to get to, shall we start by throwing over to our resident draft and off-season expert? Aldrin, what are your thoughts on, well, let's start with Sam Darnold and the things that have transpired over the last 7 days or so.
It kind of felt inevitable for the last few weeks, hasn't it, really, that Darnold was going to leave. I think the whole Zach Wilson talk from the last, few weeks and at his pro day always suggested that the Jets were going to go and pick him if they could. It didn't really seem like there was any other alternative. Douglas didn't draft Darnold. Obviously, they've got Salah coming in as a new coach, so they're going to want to have their own kind of pick of the team and decide how they're going to move forward with that, as an organization. So it didn't feel out of the realms of possibility. And really, I think everybody comes out a winner from it, don't they? I think the Jets arguably get to pick their quarterback of the future and still get what I think was pretty fair compensation for, Darnold, when the talk was that he was going to offer higher than a third round pick in future years. So I think they got a second and a fourth and a sixth this year. So I think you'd be pretty happy with that compensation. I think, for the Carolina Panthers, it makes a lot of sense. They've not had to give up the earth for a quarterback who could arguably still turn out to be an incredible franchise player. I think when he came out of college and he was drafted very high, there was a reason for that. The guy's got a hell of a lot of arm talent and he came with a lot of promise. And I think as well, it's easy to forget that the guy's younger than Joe Burrow. He's still a really young quarterback. He's had a really rough ride in terms of coaches and organizational change and, frankly, just no weapons or offense to speak of, particularly even a run game in New York. So I think he probably comes out of it happy. I think everyone's a winner.
Yeah, I'm kind of broadly with you. I certainly think Darnold's a winner. I think, the Jets, like you say, could have maybe hoped for more in an ideal situation. But ultimately, once they'd really played their hand and once everybody knew they were moving on from Darnold, it always meant the price was never going to be the absolute top dollar. The thing I like about this, I've said on this podcast, got over the last few months, what a big fan I am of Sam Darnold. The big thing for me is that, what's come out over the last week is how close a lot of people believe the Carolina Panthers were to going and getting Deshaun Watson. Now, obviously, that's now not going to happen this offseason. He's going to start next season at best a Houston Texan. But it could be one of those sliding doors moments, couldn't it? We talked about it with the Colts and Frank Reich and how close they were to ending up with McDaniels and so on. And if Darnold does turn into that franchise-level talent, or maybe just cements himself as a franchise-level talent, I think we've seen the talent in flashes for the Jets. that could work out really well for Carolina and really well for the whole Matt Rule project. Like you say, long-term project in Carolina, young quarterback now under center. The only person I think who doesn't win is probably Teddy Bridgewater. I think, as much as they've said he's available for trade, unless the Broncos or one of these teams miss out on the quarterback they've got their eye on in the draft, it doesn't really feel like there are many landing spots left for Teddy. And without that knee injury in Minnesota, how different it could have been. But yeah, I'm broadly with you. JB, your thoughts on it all?
Well, when the Stafford Goff trade went down, I remember we as a foursome had a conversation around which team won, and we kind of got into a bit of debate regarding who thought what. And I kind of agree with what Rob said. I think in this kind of scenario, there isn't necessarily a winner or loser. Each team have come out positively from it. The Jets are able to, like Aldrin has said, move on, get their new quarterback of the future, get a guy that the GM's happy with, that the coach is happy with, and start to build the Jets again. Darnold moves into a better situation in Carolina than he had in New York. I mean, primarily just because moving to a team that has Christian McCaffrey as a starting running back is an upgrade for almost any quarterback out there. So with a decent run game, with that mind Matt Rule has for football behind him, being free from Adam Gase will probably do wonders for Darnold. I think once the trade was official, I think it was like maybe a matter of hours or so before the Panthers announced that they were using the 5th-year option on Darnold's contract. So they have him locked down for 2 years. So they have this year potentially to see what they've got. And if they like it, they've then still got another year that they can work out a new contract for him to kind of retain him. If he doesn't show anything, well, you've got a guy for 2 years that you can count on. And we know Darnold is at the very least serviceable as a quarterback. So he's not going to potentially hurt the Panthers if he doesn't finally make good on that potential that he's shown, at which point the Panthers, again, to echo points that have already been made, haven't sold the earth. And if they need to go and get another quarterback in 2 years, they'll go and get another quarterback in 2 years. It's the position that you keep going to that well until you've found someone that you can count on. There are exceptions to it. We keep talking about, as everybody does, the Patriots didn't draft Tom Brady to be their starting quarterback. They drafted him to be the backup to Drew Bledsoe. That worked out differently, but you keep going until you've got it. Look at what the Browns have done and how many times the Browns went to the first round well for a quarterback and second round well for a quarterback before they finally landed on Baker Mayfield. So I think there's positives that can really help both teams.
Baker Mayfield, I suppose, partly ironically going number one in the draft, where suck for Sam was the message from those struggling teams, wasn't it? Darnold was really the guy who the world expected to be taken first overall. And yeah, how different a world we could live in. The NFL, as I think Dave Damashek used to call it on NFL.com. How many sliding doors moments can these franchises have? But yeah, I think the ceiling is high for Darnold. I think the floor is not too low. Infuriating, interceptions aside, and he's hardly the only young quarterback to have suffered with that. I think it's a great move. So Phil, my question for you then is, does this make the Panthers instantly contenders, competitive, playoff considerations, do you think?
No. I think the Panthers were pretty poor last year. I don't see them having if McCaffrey can stay fit, then they'll obviously have a better season this year. I don't see the Saints being anywhere near as good this year. The Falcons, I don't think, have done much in the off-season. So playoff contention maybe, but I don't see them as a serious threat, as an confident and cocky Buccaneers fan sat here. The thing for me, I think the biggest loser in this, actually going back to the NFC South, you've now got Jameis Winston, Sam Darnold, who all love throwing picks, Matt Ryan, who's had a rubbish year with the Falcons. So I'm looking forward to our to the grave diggers, our secondary, picking a few people off.
Do you think Matt Ryan had a bad year? I thought he had a great year.
Ryan was absolutely amazing.
It was their
a good player on a pretty bang average team, I'll give you. But yeah, I think Ryan's still got enough.
My apologies to Mr. Ryan there.
No, I think the funny thing is when you say the Carolina Panthers don't have a chance, I agree with all of your logic and just come to a different conclusion. I think actually, like you say, the Saints could be a bit off the pace for the first time in a long time. The Falcons, who knows? I think it would be a real success story if they're right up there with where they are presently. So I think, if we imagine a world even where the Buccaneers do run away with it, well, I can see the Panthers being relevant, getting in the playoffs as a number 2 or a wild card spot.
I think the thing for me with, just to touch on that, the thing for me is that because the Carolina Panthers haven't had to give up the earth this year to get arguably a franchise quarterback, they're picking at number 6, right? So they've got, is it 6 or 8? I can't remember, but they've got the pick of whatever player they want. They could end up with Kyle Trask, Jamar Chase, Jalen Waddle, any of the kind of top tier elite players in the draft at the skill positions. Bear in mind, they spent all of their draft capital last year went on defensive players.
Yeah.
So if they've added a top tier quarterback, arguably, or could be, they've got a top 10 pick this year to choose a skill player of their choosing to supplement McCaffrey and Robbie Anderson. So I think they've got a real good shot of massively improving that offense.
I think if they get one of those good wide receivers you've mentioned, I think, like you say, McCaffrey is an absolute star. I think Darnold will absolutely shine. And I think you're right. I think if they get a really good wide receiver, and you want them to hit the ground running in year 1, don't you? Which isn't always the case. But if they can do that, yeah, I can see it happening. So if that kind of tells the story of our thoughts around the Carolina Panthers.
I think there's something else to say here. I think the biggest loser of this trade is Joe Douglas, because I think he's done himself out of a job in 12 months' time. I'll be amazed if he's still the GM of the Jets this time next year. Because
based on what?
If you look at that team, sorry?
What's your logic? I think Douglas is doing a reasonable job in an otherwise bit of a tire fire of a franchise, but go on, I'm all ears.
I think if you look at that team, I think Darnold could be a decent quarterback. Everybody's saying him going to the Panthers, could elevate them, which shows you that although he's thrown some bad picks and he's had, a bad time of it in New York, I think there's still a lot of potential there. And I think he's only a year older than Zach Wilson, who's the QB it looks like they're taking. So it's not as if, he's even 3 or 4 years older than him and much further down the line. So, I think they could have done something with Darnold. And if you look at the picks the Dolphins got for the, the number 3 pick from the 49ers, you could argue that the Jets could have got maybe even a little bit more for number 2 and a bit of a king's ransom. So if you look at that offense, the only starter they've added, I think, to their offense is Corey Davis. So they've got, arguably he'll be their wide receiver 1, you'd assume, but they've added Tevin Coleman, who's not going to be who I don't think will be the starting running back for them, but I don't know. They'll probably have a running back by committee. So I just don't think they've added anything that bringing in Zach Wilson or drafting Zach Wilson is massively going to improve that team. Like I don't see him being able to do it all on his own, that they would be that much better than if they'd have kept Darnold and use the number 2 pick as leverage to get some stars in or some draft picks in to tool up a little bit more. So I think, I don't see them having much better of a year this year. And I could really genuinely see him out of a job this time next year.
I think your premise is based around the fact that this has to be a win it or go home year for the Jets. And I kind of don't think it is. I think bringing in a coach in like Salah is a first-time head coach who's been successful as a defensive coordinator is one of the things where it's, look, this isn't a produce immediately in the first year. This is a, look, we're going to build up, because I think there's been enough evidence recently of you need to get your coach in to build a team and then success will come. With maybe the exception of Stefanski going into Cleveland, there hasn't really been a coach that's got Stefanski and McVay. Those two kind of came in and did really well in their first years. But looking at the teams that they had around them, the Browns and the Rams had an abundance of talent that just wasn't performing. So they came in, got the talent, incredible talent they had going, and there was it. I think going into somewhere like the Jets, you're right. They're very talent depleted. They haven't got an explosive star player that you would immediately look at and think, oh yeah, that's the guy the Jets are going to put on the program. That's the guy they're going to put on the season tickets. I am just going to go with some numbers though. 2, 23, 34, 66 and 86. They are the 5 picks that the Jets have in the top 100 in the draft. So yeah, we're talking about, oh, the Jets could have got loads for the number 2, or they could have got loads for Darnold. They've come out of this quite well. What they have got is, instead of having, oh, we've got 2 1s and 3 4s and 7 6s and 3 7s, they've like, right, we've got 2 in the first and 2 in the third. And they are the kind of rounds where you want to have those kind of picks. You want to have that ammunition, because if we have, and as we have on this podcast, talked about the draft being a bit of a gamble, and you've got a 50-50 chance of drafting someone, the Jets, I'm so used to the Browns having 2 picks in the first round. The Jets have got 2 opportunities in the first to get it right. And going back to an example that we talked about, if we talk about the Rams, the last time the Rams had 2 picks in the first round, the first pick they meant was Greg Robinson, who was a decent tackle, but kind of, I think he's washed out of the league at the moment. And the second pick was some guy called Aaron, and he's done all right. So if the Jets can use one of those first rounds to get a quality player like that, I think it's a success, and I think they've got something to build on.
I'm kind of with Phil's logic, and again, just like his previous point, I just come to a slightly different conclusion. I mean, on this pod a month ago, I basically said what you've said, Phil. They keep Sam Darnold, they get a bounty of picks, they build. I think the expectation to not necessarily win now, but definitely show significant improvement on last year would have been there if Darnold had stayed. I actually think Douglas and Salah, like JB said, buy themselves time, really. They give themselves probably 3 years to show that they're building something capable of winning by going with a new quarterback. And I think that clean slate, I mean, it's amazing the amount of leeway you're given if you're clearing out, and Aldrin made this point, if you're clearing out players from the previous regime. If you're moving out players from the previous general manager and the picks that they made, it does give you that little bit more leniency. But yeah, if I was the general manager of the Jets, I'd have gone with your plan. I'd have kept Darnold as a big fan of the guy. I'd have utilised those picks and tried to get more starters. But yeah, it feels like they're building from the ground up, doesn't it? It really feels like a bit of a clear out. And, as much as I'm a fan of Darnold, after what we saw last season, I don't think many people can really complain. So if we're talking about, and I mean, the Browns have come up in this a few times kind of inadvertently, but if we've started by talking about a team like the Jets, who are ultimately perennial underachievers, really, in recent history, what about the big news then, that a team that definitely isn't a perennial underachiever, a team that is, only 2 seasons removed from taking their team to the Super Bowl, no less, have really given up, sold the house, sold the boat, sold the car, really sent themselves downstream, because they clearly love a quarterback who's capable of going in the first few picks. And we're going to speculate, and I think everyone's got a pretty good idea of who that quarterback is. But anyone in our virtual room going to tell me they saw the 49ers being that bold and doing that much to get themselves that high in the top 10?
It's weird, isn't it? Because they've said that Garoppolo is definitely going to be their starter. Or they, I suppose that's what you'd say, even if you wanted to trade him to try and get as high value. But it's a strange one. The Patriots, they talk about still circling around for Garoppolo, but what's the point of getting Garoppolo if you've got Cam Newton and then the potential to draft one of the top, 5 to 10 quarterbacks in the draft? You presume they might want to take someone who'll start by the end of the season there. So yeah, it's a bit of a weird one, unless they really are committed to Garoppolo this year and letting whoever they draft, that maybe whoever they draft they don't think is ready, and they want them to sit behind Garoppolo for a year. But you think with the number 3 pick, you assume Trevor Lawrence goes 1 and then Zach Wilson goes 2. It was always, or for a long time, Lawrence or Fields in terms of who'd go number 1. So you think Justin Fields would be the next one to go at number 3, but then it doesn't sound like the 49ers are too hot on him. So, could he then fall to, the Falcons at number 4, for example, because and I know I'm getting a little bit off topic here because, I think he's a Georgia boy or he's played in Georgia at college. So, that's a really good fit and it all starts to work out quite interestingly. But yeah, I was surprised to see the 49ers trade up. I don't think it was their biggest issue. I don't necessarily think that Shanahan is brilliant with bringing on quarterbacks. If you look at some of his past history and records that they've had. But we'll see what happens. It's certainly going to be interesting.
I've only got a few bits to add to your point before I throw out the other guys. I think you're right. I think they're looking to draft somebody and give that rookie a redshirt season, to just sit behind Garoppolo and learn. And part of that is exactly what you said. I think it's Shanahan. And I don't think he's bad with young quarterbacks or bad with quarterbacks at all, but he runs such a complex system. Even his calling and his play call, it's so complex that I think to imagine you could get a rookie into a first-year starting situation is a tough one. Having said that, I mean, has Garoppolo even played 16 or what will it be, 17 games this season ever? I mean, he's so injury prone that maybe that's a decision that will be taken out their hands. But yeah, I mean, Trey Lance is kind of the name, isn't it? And they must really love him. I mean, like I say, it was a name that wasn't really one that was around 3, 4, 5 months ago, who all of a sudden could find himself in a great situation akin to Mahomes in Kansas City, with a really good offensive-minded head coach who can do great things. But yeah, feels like another long-term pick. So who wants to go now? Aldrin, do I throw over to you next?
This trade, again, I know we have not touched on it, but I think this is a brilliant trade for everybody. We didn't talk about Miami in all of this. Miami have traded out of 3, gone down to 12 and come back up to 6. I think for them, that's really smart business. They're obviously happy with Tua in so much that he's clearly going to be the starter this year. They've traded out of 3 for what was a king's ransom and then moved up for a little bit, taken a little bit of that money away, capital away rather. But, they're back up in 6. They're picking, again, like I was talking about with Carolina, they've got their pick of probably, Jamar Chase or Kyle Pitts or, one of those elite players. So they've not really had to give up too much to come back into the first, into the top 10 and get a player of their choosing to supplement to his development and give him some more weapons. So on that side of things, I think it's brilliant. From the 49ers, I was a little bit surprised that they've moved up quite so high. I mean, I've watched a fair bit of college football and I've seen a bunch of these guys. I'm not massively high on this draft class of quarterbacks as some people seem to be this year, but it seems like arguably you could have 4 quarterbacks going in the first 4 picks for the first time. I don't think there's the talent in this draft that there has been in previous ones where that hasn't happened. But I think, like you said, they seem to have fallen in love with a quarterback. Now, really, if you're picking 3, Justin Fields is the player I would be taking. I think he's a real top level talent. I think he's got all of the attributes that you want in terms of his ability, his toughness. I think if anybody saw the Ohio State Clemson game where he played, the presumptive number 1 Trevor Lawrence off the park after having a massive hit to his hip and was, pretty much sidelined for half the game when he took that hit, came back and threw, 6 touchdowns in that game. So I think he's the guy that if I was picking at 3, and I'm assuming that Trevor Lawrence and Zach Wilson have gone 1-2, he would be the guy that I would choose. Now, there's been, I don't know, his kind of draft stock seems to have fallen over some chatter recently that, he doesn't get past his first read, but, arguably it's not his fault if the first guy he looks at is open and he's throwing 6 touchdowns in a game. I don't think that's a fault in his game. And I think, again, if you go back to some of the big games last year that he played, against Clemson and against Alabama. I think arguably his best game was against Alabama when they got slaughtered as a team, but he played brilliant. And then people question his desire. The guy was petitioning for college football to return and them to get back to playing games. So I don't think you can question the guy's commitment to wanting to be great when you're going out petitioning to play football. Unlike some, you're talking about Jamar Chase, where he's opted out of the season. There's a lot of top tier talents that opted out last year. And, Justin Fields was one of the guys advocating for college football to be back and for him to be playing. So he would be the guy that I would pick. Trey Lance, if I'm honest, is I think the guy that they're going to go for. He seems, when they made that draft trade, the only guy whose pro day you'd seen was his. So, it was him or Trevor Lawrence. I think maybe Mac Jones had his first pro day, but if I'm honest, if you watch that, it was garbage. I wouldn't be picking him off that. So I think the thing with Trey Lance is, and the reason people are so intrigued by his skill set is, he's had such a small sample size. He's played 17 games total, only one game last season and 16 the year before. But he's come from a system at North Dakota State where they play a very pro-ready offense. Obviously Carson Wentz is the last guy that came out of that scheme, and he was pro-ready straight away. So even though his sample size is really small, they do a lot of NFL type quarterback skills that potentially some of the other guys don't have to do. He dissects things at the line. He's doing calls in the huddle. He's moving, play calls and all this kind of stuff. So he's doing NFL caliber things. And then his physical traits are just off the charts. I think if you look at him, if you look at some of like the sample tape from him, and there's not a lot admittedly, but he runs like the closest person I can suggest is probably Cam Newton. He's a big-bodied guy, but he's got a hell of a lot of pace when he gets up running. And, he's done a lot of that RPOs in college and designed runs, and there's lots of that. So I think the reason I think the 49ers go for him is that they've talked about Mac Jones being, really exciting, the type of quarterback that Kyle Shanahan wants. Mac Jones is just a poor man's Jimmy Garoppolo, to my mind. He's not got a big arm. He's not great moving. He's not going to enhance the playbook. I think you throw Trey Lance in there and you've got a quarterback that is skilled, talented, can throw the ball, can do all the NFL type things, but also he adds a completely different dynamic to your game. You can do these designed runs. You can move him around. You can do lots of other things to enhance that playbook. And obviously, Rob, you talked about the complexity of his playbook. If you can maybe simplify that down, but add extra elements to it, designed runs and all this kind of stuff, that Kyle Shanahan offense suddenly becomes, incredibly scary. So I think Trey Lance is the guy that you need to sit for a year. Really, he's going to have to, build up experience that he hasn't got in college like some of the other guys have. But I think year 2 and beyond, he probably offers the most intrigue and upside over somebody like a Mac Jones, who might come in and be slightly more pro-ready, but arguably, doesn't move the chains any better than anybody they've got on their current roster.
So JB, wanting to get your point, and I'll give you a starting question maybe, and you might find your way back to similar points to Aldrin. Do you think this plan then, good teams don't get high draft picks, and the 49ers at the moment are in that bracket even after an injury hit season last season. So do you think that the 49ers are looking at, if we think it is Trey Lance, this redshirt year, this ability to mold him as a way of staying competitive long term? They're thinking Garoppolo is, not exactly a, below par starter when we can keep him fit and healthy. Do you think that's the 49ers? It feels different to the rebuild in New York with the Jets, right?
Yeah, to kind of piggyback off Phil's point around Joe Douglas and the Jets, this to me was the much bigger, swing for the fences, push everything into one moment thing. Interestingly enough, while I agree with a lot of what Aldrin has said there, I'm really leaning more towards them going for Justin Fields. And I don't have anything more than that other than I just think that's what they'll do. So I could be way off with that. And as everyone's been talking, I've kind of been racking up a couple of things in my head. I think Phil made mention of the fact that the 49ers didn't really kind of commit to Garoppolo this year. And I think what they said was, Jimmy's our quarterback this year. And it wasn't, he's our starting quarterback. He is our starting quarterback this year. And that is not a lie, because where did I leave?
That is not a lie.
So I don't think so. They haven't lied with what they've said. I think the goal is bring in a redshirt quarterback, someone that can sit and, like Rob said, learn Kyle Shanahan's system. We saw in the pre-show stuff they did when the Falcons made the Super Bowl, that connection between Kyle Shanahan and Matt Ryan, which I think was also the year Ryan was the MVP, proved just how effective that system is once you've got your head wrapped around it. And yeah, you need a season to wrap your head around it. I think to kind of answer a point that Robert also raised about Garoppolo's durability and Garoppolo's availability. Garoppolo has played 16 games in a season once. That was the 2019 season when he went 13-3 and the 49ers went to the Super Bowl. Otherwise, obviously, his time in New England was backing up Tom Brady, which is very rare you're going to play. Otherwise, it's always been short games because he's been injured. Now, Garoppolo's record is still pretty good. 2017, he went 5-0. 2018, he went 1-2. 2019, he went 13-3. And last season, he went 3-3 before he was injured. That's not a terrible record for a starting quarterback. However, it's all truncated. It is all... yeah, he was doing really well, and then something happened to derail him. And that's where I think the 49ers are coming from. I think, much like a lot of people, they have kind of pegged Garoppolo as, yes, he's really good when he's on the field, but he's not on the field often enough for us. And the deal that they signed him to in sort of the 2018 preseason, the 5-year deal, the guaranteed money was in the first 3 seasons. So that would be 18, 19, 20. They don't owe him anything. So at the end of this, if they come away from it thinking, right, we have our quarterback of the future who is now sat and we have marinated him and we have prepared him ready for the big show next season. Jimmy, would you be interested in still staying with the 49ers and functioning as the backup? And if Garoppolo is happy to stay with the organization, I think they'll work something out. Garoppolo may not, though. Garoppolo may want to be like, no, I'm going to go test free agency and see if I can land with someone. And knowing how the NFL rolls, there will be people who will be looking for quarterbacks at the end of this coming season. To go back, I think, to what Rob's original question was, and I think I've said it, yes, this is absolutely not a Jets style, Browns style, Titan style to a degree, rebuild from the bottom. This is we are one piece away. That piece is the quarterback, and we need to go and get that quarterback.
As a remarkable thing, I mean, firstly, again, a bit like Phil has his bias with the Buccaneers, I'll say I think the NFC West has got a really good chance of being a very competitive division for the next few years. I mean, I know people talk about the troubles at Seattle at the moment, but they've still got Russell Wilson, and that's absolutely the ace in the pack you want. It does seem bizarre. A few of you said it. I was absolutely gobsmacked, to be honest, by the trade. I think there'll be more. On the back of your point, Phil, I think lots of people are saying the Falcons take a quarterback at 4. My gut feel is I don't think they do want to take a quarterback at 4, but I don't think it hurts them if other people think they might. I think that probably gives them the chance of, getting some draft capital. I think you look at players like Kyle Pitts. I mean, there's a few players outside of the quarterbacks in the top 10, undoubtedly going to go top 10, that people are very high on. And I think some of those players could be really good for Atlanta with where they are. But yeah, really, I mean, I keep coming back. They must, whoever they've got their eye on, I'm with you, Aldrin. I think it's Lance, not Fields, based on timings and the things that are coming out. They must really like the guy, like Dave Gettleman liking Daniel Jones, really like the guy. They clearly, whoever it is, they've absolutely got it in mind. So if that gives us our little bridge to come to the draft more generally, and I mean, look, the last 5 minutes we've kind of been talking largely draft, I suppose. A mention of marinating. I mean, that's not used enough as a metaphor when talking about professional sports. But let me just set something up and then let you guys roll. Aldrin's made this point, but I absolutely agree. If you're looking at 4 QBs going 1, 2, 3, and 4 for the first time ever, this doesn't feel like the class where that should be happening. You know, I mean, you've got to go back to what, is it late 70s, early 80s, where you had Marino, Elway, Kelly, and Ken O'Brien, I think, who were 4 quarterbacks who all went very high. 3 of those ended up in the Hall of Fame, and I think poor old Ken O'Brien could absolutely consider himself in the Hall of Very Good. You know, 4 players who went on to have really stellar careers. I mean, I think there's going to be some hits and misses in this draft. I'm with you. The Mac Jones thing, I don't get at all. And actually, having looked at pro days and films, and I'm not a big college football fan, I'm doing this retrospectively, as many NFL fans will. I was amazed, right? So if you go to the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, they've got a quarterback called Ian Book, who when I watch his film, I think he's actually a quarterback playing really well in a really bad team. You know, the kind of thing that doesn't get you noticed in college. So Ian Book, I'd probably say in my mind, based on the little film I've watched, I'd put ahead of Mac Jones. Ian Book is expected to go undrafted. Most mock drafts I look at have got Mac Jones going, if not top 10, then top 15. It just seems like there are so many swings and misses. It doesn't feel like the caliber's there at quarterback. But Aldrin, what am I missing? Because the NFL obviously thinks I'm wrong.
No, I think you're bang on. And Mac Jones is one that has just baffled me beyond belief. Because if you go back 3-4 weeks, Mac Jones is predicted to go 3rd round, 2nd round at most. And then all of a sudden he has 2 pro days, neither of which, if you watch them, are any good. You know, he's not throwing
Anyone I've
bombs.
seen, I'd agree. Yeah.
I think, you know, he throws the ball all right. I think really helps if you play in Alabama with Jalen Waddle and Devontae, what's his name? Devontae Smith.
Yeah.
You know, you're playing with 2 of the best wide receivers in the league, one of the best running backs in the league, behind the best line. Like, I mean, I'm not being funny, but a lot of quarterbacks at college level could play really well in that scheme. And admittedly, Mac Jones has won games and he's played fine. And then all of a sudden, the last 3 weeks, all this buzz is that, you know, the 49ers are falling in love with him. Everybody's falling in love with him. He could go top 3. And I don't get it. I think my thought coming into the last college year was that Trevor Lawrence was going number 1, Justin Fields was going number 2, and then you'd be looking a long way down to find another quarterback that would get drafted. I genuinely thought you'd see two top tier quarterbacks go in the top 10, and then that would be your lot. I think Zach Wilson had a really, really good year, right? But if you go back and look at his 2019 tape, it's not particularly good. He didn't have a very good year. He's had a phenomenal year in a COVID year, but he plays for BYU. So, you know, he's not playing against the best competition. And admittedly, I've watched his pro days and I've watched some of him in college, and he throws a nice ball. And the thing with him is he throws really well, you know, moving out of the pocket and those kind of off-kilter plays that people seem to love at the minute, you know, the Mahomes type, the Russell Wilson type throws that you see falling down, throwing the ball 50, 60 yards down the field. So he does throw a nice ball and he plays really well. So I think that kind of makes more sense. But yeah, the whole Mac Jones thing, I don't get it. I think there's way better prospects in the draft. And I think you're right. I think there's going to be a lot of misses. And I think the 49ers could be, you know, they've got to love Trey Lance, and you've got to hope that the potential that you see in him, which you've got to be honest, is potential. He's played 1 college year, 17 games total. You know, you've got to hope that he's got the ability to realize that potential. Otherwise, you're out of a job. But if I was picking a quarterback, I'd only be picking 2. I think Trevor Lawrence is a sure thing. You know, he's been a sure thing since he started high school, let alone college, let alone coming into the NFL. And Justin Fields, I think, is a top tier player. I think you look at his physicality, he's kind of like Dak Prescott. And I think we all know how well he does and how important he is as a franchise quarterback. But yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of misses. I think there's a potential in this draft class for a lot of hits as well further down the draft. I think, you've got an awful lot of good offensive tackles, which if you're our teams, so the Colts and the Steelers, you're thrilled that there's going to be a plethora of potential left tackles, maybe right tackles lower down in the draft. So I think you'd be quite happy with that. I think there's a good number of cornerbacks. So again, you'll be pretty happy that there's some top tier ones, although admittedly lower down the draft, you're not looking great. But wide receiver, I think you're overburdened with. So I think anybody can find a good one this year. Certainly if you're picking in the top 20, maybe, I think you get a really elite type player. So yeah, I think there's a lot to like.
Me, I'm just looking at Peter Schrager's mock draft that was released today. And with pick number 5, he's got the Bengals taking Jamar Chase. He's obviously, a top tier wide receiver, it looks like. And he's got him taking Chase, or got the Bengals taking Chase off the back of Chase having a season with Joe Burrow at LSU where, he racked up 84 catches, 1,780 yards and 20 touchdowns. But, I saw a pretty funny meme that basically said, if the Bengals draft Sewell, Burrow will have time to throw to someone. If the Bengals draft Chase or one of the other wide receivers, they're never going to get the ball because Burrow will already been smashed behind that offensive line. Like I don't see the Bengals not drafting Penei Sewell, left tackle. Well, probably left tackle if not then right tackle. But I just think that's a pick that they can't miss on. I think
I kind of agree, but they've got 2 tackles in free agency and they paid them pretty handsomely. So you've got to be fairly comfortable with the guys you've picked up. I don't get me wrong. I think if they don't pick Penei Sewell, then they're absolutely bonkers. But it's not beyond the realms of possibility that they do pick a skill player, I think, because Jamar Chase, arguably beyond Trevor Lawrence, I would say is the best player in this draft. So
see, I like Pitts and Waddle from what I've seen, but I will say to your point, Phil, about Schrager's mock draft, Peter Schrager does very creative mock drafts. So if you're looking at the one I'm looking at, I think he had the Cardinals trading away next season's first round pick to get Kyle Pitts, right? Which is never going to happen in a million years. But I like the fact that Schrager just doesn't, run the numbers 1 through 32. He does things with his mock drafts that others don't. But I think, the big question for me, and I know we've kind of moved away from it slightly. Firstly, let's mention Trevor Lawrence, right? Because for all the quarterbacks we've mentioned at 2, 3, potentially 4, 10, 15 or whatever, Trevor Lawrence at the Jags is a dead cert for a reason. He's absolutely brilliant. But so much of this draft does depend on whether those quarterbacks really do go that high. If they don't, do the Broncos or the Patriots pick up one of these guys further down? How much of this is a smokescreen? How much of this is really going to play out is surely where the real draft mystery is, isn't it, JB?
See, that's where I'm kind of sat at. And I had an answer and a point to go around your original question, but I think I want to come back to that and we'll deal with this bit first. I cannot imagine a scenario where the Jacksonville Jaguars do not pick Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence threw at his pro day before getting shoulder surgery because Urban Meyer suggested that it would be a good idea for him to do that. If the Jags aren't taking him, that is the biggest bluff in the history of bluffing ever.
It's back to Schrager's mock draft as well. He basically said if the Jags weren't taking Trevor Lawrence, Urban Meyer wouldn't have left the Fox Sports studio. So I think that's nailed on as it was that the Colts were going to take Andrew.
Yeah. And I think we are correct in kind of the Jets will take a quarterback and the 49ers are trading up to take a quarterback. After that, I think it all depends. It all depends on what the Falcons do, and part of that I think comes down to who of the 4 we have talked about that are potentially those first 3 picks is available. Because let's say the 49ers take Lance and the Falcons absolutely love Fields. The Falcons will then be dealing with, okay, do we want to pass on this guy for something potentially next year, or do we want to take this guy? I read kind of a piece on the Steelers website this week where it's like the asked and answered, where fans send in questions and the guy answers them. And kind of one of his answers basically came, if Najee Harris is available at the 24th pick, I would run that pick in as fast as I could as the Steelers. Yes, the Steelers have needs at tackle and things like that, but Harris should absolutely be the pick. Now that's an opinion. I'm not necessarily saying I agree with it or disagree with it, but I think for so many teams at the moment, it is that carry-on effect, that knock-on effect of, right, who is actually available versus who do we need? To go back to Rob's first point around, is this the year, is this the draft class where 4 quarterbacks potentially go 1, 2, 3, 4? And bear with me, we're going to go back in time for one of my favorite things to do and talk about history. And we're going to go all the way back to 1999, which I believe is the last time 3 quarterbacks were picked 1, 2, 3. And anyone tell me the names of any of those quarterbacks?
99.
And obviously, as we're doing this for radio, we'll speed up and not give Rob the time to answer it this time. But the order went: Cleveland Browns picked Tim Couch, the Philadelphia Eagles picked Donovan McNabb, and the Cincinnati Bengals picked Achilles Smith. Now, looking back now to that draft, would you put those quarterbacks 1, 2, 3? No.
Donovan McNabb, I think.
Yes.
Went on
McNabb is the most successful out of those. Yeah.
I mean, the Browns also killed Couch. I mean, I'm not sure it was necessarily Couch's fault, but yeah, I get your point.
But, yeah, let's go back one more year from that. Let's go back to 1998 when the big battle was, do the Colts with the first pick of the draft take Peyton Manning or Ryan Leaf? Again, nowadays, it was obvious that you take Peyton Manning. He was one of the greatest quarterbacks ever. But the fact is, at the time, the serious debate was which of the two of these is going to be most successful. That's even more recently than that, when it was going to be, is it Goff or is it Wentz that the Rams take? The hype for both of those two seemed to come out of nowhere. That was a year where the draft class was, there's not really any quarterbacks you think would go quite high. And then as we got through the combine and pro days and got closer and closer to the drafts, it suddenly became, who are the Rams taking number 1? Is it Goff or is it Wentz? I think this hype around quarterbacks, because it is arguably the most important position on the field, is always something that's going to be, no matter how poor potentially a draft class can be received, as we get closer and closer to someone being on the clock, the hype for quarterbacks is gonna build up. So yes, I can kind of believe this is the first year that we get a 1, 2, 3, 4, because this year we've actually got 4, 5, like 6 potentially that we could talk about going in the first round.
Oh God, if Davis Mills goes in the first round, I think I'm not sure I can watch any of the other days. I mean, the point, and it's only a quick counterbalance. If you look at the real hits over the last 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, I'm going back actually in total. So Deshaun Watson, Lamar Jackson, and Patrick Mahomes. Well, none of them went first overall or anywhere near first overall in essence. I mean, Deshaun Watson was obviously higher than Lamar Jackson and so on. But ultimately, as much as we're saying there could be some real swings and misses at the top of the draft order, it's not a perfect science. Well, Aldrin's made the point, and I kind of made the point, although I'm reaching a bit maybe for Ian Book. Is there a value pick in this draft that, actually, I mean, Lamar Jackson, did he go with, was it the second to last pick in the first round or the last pick in the first round to the Ravens trading up, something like that?
Yeah, he traded back
I mean, you rewrite that draft, I think Lamar Jackson goes first, doesn't he? Or goes first, second, third, that kind of realm. I mean, the only weird thing is for me in this draft is when I said, is the value, Aldrin shaking his head, because after those first 4, 5, some people are predicting Davis Mills goes in the second out of Stanford. But then the next quarterback pick on a lot of mock drafts is like, third day. I mean, there are a lot of people going undrafted. There are a lot of people at these big, top tier colleges who are going in round 5 and 6 who clearly the world just hasn't got on board with and hasn't got excited about at all, have they?
Well, I think one of the key things I think you've talked about there is successful high-ranked quarterbacks recently. And just these are the last 8 first picks, number 1. So going back in, Joe Burrow, Kyler Murray, Baker Mayfield, Myles Garrett, Jared Goff, Jameis Winston, Jadeveon Clowney, and offensive tackle Eric Fisher. And I'm looking at that and kind of saying, well, you know what? There's 3 there out of those 8 that I would say are for now first round caliber people, and that's Murray, Mayfield, and Garrett. I don't think Goff was worth the first. I don't think Winston was, and we have seen Winston play live, and 2 of us have made a bet on whether how many interceptions he's going to throw, and that started with the very first throw of the game. Clowney's never really amounted to the hype, and Fisher has turned into a serviceable tackle, but you don't want a serviceable tackle with your first round pick. Burrow is the X factor, because I don't think one season where he got injured part of the way through it is enough to judge him. It could be anything. And we talk about Phil's absolute favorite NFL player in the history of the NFL ever, the legend of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Thomas Brady. Brady went third day. No one expected him to amount to anything. So we're talking about, these players like Kyle Trask might not go in the third or the fourth, but we could be sat here this time next year saying, God, man, I wasn't expecting it, but Kyle Trask really followed on from Justin Herbert in terms of outstanding rookie quarterback performances. And Herbert's a great example, because who saw that coming?
Well, the Chargers picked him high enough to probably suggest they did, but you are right. I mean, he was absolutely the shock. I mean, 2 quick things again from me and I'll move aside. Joe Burrow, I'm not sold on at all. I don't see what people saw. I saw some really nice little, first year starts and first year plays from a rookie quarterback who was ultimately fighting hard in a really talent-free team. I just never saw him do anything like what I saw out of Herbert. And also, I mean, God, Phil gets to be biased enough on this podcast. You've just named whatever it was, the last 8 first overall picks. For me, Kyler Murray is head and shoulders above every other name that you mentioned. You go back. For me, I think Kyler Murray is an absolute game-changing talent in Arizona. I think what he'll do this year will probably outstrip what he did in years 1 and 2. I love the fact that we've got Murray under center at the Cardinals. I quite like, Wentz, Goff, Winston. Winston was the, God, I'm going to end up talking about a backup quarterback in the Los Angeles Raiders if I'm not careful on it. But Winston, obviously, with that hype around who was going to go first that year as well. I don't know. I think the difference here is we're talking about the guy who goes number 1 being an absolute superstar, aren't we? I think probably being the best draft prospect in a decade, really, with Trevor Lawrence. But yeah, I do wonder where the rest will fall. And that's the beauty of the draft, isn't it? There's no science to it, and some very smart people are made to look very silly, when they draft certain players.
I think that was going to be my point that you just touched on there, is that out of all of those names that JB talked about, they were all, rated highly coming out of college, but none kind of the level of expectation or hype of Trevor Lawrence. And like you say, that kind of, when they call them sure things coming out of college, I think he's as near to it as you had when Andrew Luck was coming out, or prior to that, Peyton Manning. So I think, you get one of these types of players once every 10 years. And I can't see anything that suggests that Trevor Lawrence isn't an absolute stud at the quarterback position in the NFL for years to come. To your earlier point about, where the draft kind of sits in terms of value, I'll go back to my earlier point. I think there's 2 quarterbacks worth taking if you want them to start and be serviceable this year. I think everybody else is a risk, including Zach Wilson. I'm still not sold on him. So yeah, I don't know. It's difficult, because I don't I'm not as hyped about this quarterback class as a lot of people seem to be, or certainly that seem to have rocketed up mock drafts and people's thinking. But if Zach Wilson does go number 2, I have a question for the group. Who's the last BYU quarterback to enter the league? And Phil, don't be Googling because I know what you're like.
I mean, the obvious thing to there is going to either be Steve Young or Jim McMahon.
I'm thinking way more recent. It was a starter last year. And he was at BYU, honestly, for about 7 years because he had so many injuries and he kept missing years. But come on. Top tier starting quarterback last year.
Top tier starting quarterback last
year. Well, I'm doing him a real... I'm bigging him
up. Oh, it's Thingy at the Saints, isn't it?
Taysom Hill. Yes. Taysom Hill, the last BYU quarterback to enter the league. So there you are, Phil. There's your quiz of the week. I'll do it for you.
Nicely done. Well, we're fast running out of time anyway, and quiz of the week may have to carry over to next week. But do you know what? For all the smart chat, and I don't know, maybe I don't sound half as smart as I think I do, for all of these points I make about who I think is going to be a hit, who I think is going to be a miss, how can these GMs pick certain players? I think 2 or 3 years ago, I was absolutely astounded when the Buffalo Bills picked Josh Allen. And I couldn't believe that with a top 10 pick, they picked a guy who just looked as rough and as ropey and as poor mechanically as he did. And everyone kept saying, oh, he's got this massive arm. He's got this arm talent. He's the kind of player you can develop. And he just had bust written all over him for me. And I tell you what, you redo that draft again. And I think, Allen went, 2 spots before Rosen, something like that. And I think, God, look back on that historically, and I don't think I'd feel quite as smug about the Cardinals grabbing Rosen at 10. I mean, what they turn into, what they grow into in an NFL system can be a very different thing. But I tell you what, I mean, we've obviously got, the draft going to be dominating both before and after the draft. Will probably dominate the podcast for the next few weeks. But nice that we've mentioned, Sewell and Pitts and Waddle and others. But let's absolutely come back to those other positions outside of quarterback in future weeks, because I think there's an awful lot we can mine for there and talk about. But as we kind of get to the point where we're wrapping up, any final thoughts on, should we say, what you'd want your team to do when it comes to the draft? So, JB, you've kind of touched on what you want the Steelers to do. I thought you were going to be all over. Let me look at my notes. Carlos Basham, the premium edge rusher in this draft, coming out of Wake Forest. I thought he had Steeler written all over him, but you say no. So let's start with you and tell me what the Steelers need to do in the draft.
So a lot of Steelers fans are talking about the need to get a rusher, but I think we've got TJ Watt, who, if the Steelers ever considered trading, I would fly to Pittsburgh and fight anybody who attempted it. And I think they're quite high on Alex Highsmith. I think a rusher to spell in for either of those two is probably what you're looking for. And I think that's a round 2, 3, 4 kind of situation. For me, I would love them to spend it on a tackle. I think we need, Villanueva hasn't re-signed, but he hasn't re-signed anywhere. So I think the potential is always there that they'll bring him back. But he was always better as a pass blocker than a run blocker. And I think the Steelers want to get back to that run heavy, run first kind of offense that's brought them so much success. That kind of leads me to believe that if Harris is available, they'll take him. And I can't really see past that, because Sewell's not going to be available. I don't think many of kind of the high value tackles will be. So it might be Harris and then get a tackle or something in the next round.
Yeah, Sewell being gone seems almost a certainty. So you heard it here first. JB's happy to have the second best Watt brother doing all of the pass rushing, and then you'll just pick up a tackle in round 2 or 3. So what do the Colts need to do, Aldrin? Before we hear Phil talk about cornerbacks for Tampa Bay, what do the Colts need to do?
I'm kind of with JB. I think we need to solve the left tackle position. I think that's what we're probably pitching for in the first round. So I think there's a lot that are going to be available. There's a guy from Texas, Samuel Cosme, that we seem to be really high on. Really good athlete, massive guy, just needs a bit of work. So arguably he might be the guy we go for, because we're not picking particularly high. But, if there's Elijah Vera Tucker or Christian Darrisaw there, then I think we'd happily take any of those. So I would expect that we go tackle first round and then pick up some wide receivers and some skill players further down the line, as well as a cornerback. But I think there's value in rounds 2 and 3.
Yeah, I think cornerbacks are going to be in pretty high demand. What do you think? I mean, are we oversimplifying this, Phil? But we've talked about cornerback being a relative weakness for the otherwise star-studded Bucs. Do you think it's CB or safety they go for in the draft?
I don't know now, to be honest. I think if you asked me, it definitely won't be a safety. I don't think we've got a need at safety. Antoine Winfield Jr. coming in from last year's draft has been an absolute home run. A real steal to get him as low as we did. And then I think supported by Jordan Whitehead and Mike Edwards, who both had big roles in different playoff games.
We're talking about what players you need, Phil, not what players you have. This is
that's what I'm saying.
An appreciation post.
Pinion gets a mention in a second, doesn't he? It's only a matter of time before Bradley Pinion comes up.
Rob mentioned safety. I'm explaining why not. But I don't know, cornerback. If you'd asked me at the end of the regular season, do we need to improve our cornerbacks? I'd have said yes. But then they really showed up in the playoffs, and I think it made a big difference. When Vita Vea came back and our pass rush became a lot more prominent, quarterbacks had less time to throw. Ultimately, our cornerbacks looked a lot better. So, but to be honest, I think the Bucs will just take the best player available. I think they'll have everybody graded, and they'll see what's kind of tossed up there. And if there's a quarterback that they particularly like, that they think can sit behind Brady for a year or two and learn, they might take a quarterback. I don't see them taking a running back now. They've got Leonard Fournette signed again behind Rojo. So I don't know. I think it'll either be O-line, an edge rusher for me. But best player available. And I think if you look at Jason Light's drafts over the last few years, Vita Vea, Devin White, Antoine Winfield, Tristan Wirfs in the first round last year, he had some great successes. So I trust him. But I could see us trading down, I don't think there's a particular need. And if we can get a bit more draft capital, if there's someone there that a team, are concerned about not landing at their pick, I could see us trading back down from 32.
Trading down from the basement of the draft.
But I think Phil's got a point, because I think of all 32 teams, I think the Bucs are in that very small club of being able to take the best player available, whatever that position may be, because they are not necessarily superstar strong everywhere, but they are still strong everywhere. So if their favorite cornerback is available at 32, take him. If their favorite tackle is available at 32, take him. If their favorite wide receiver or tight end is available, take him. I think that's just the position they're in. It's a position we'd all love our own clubs to be in.
And I'll tell you what, I'll round out then by saying I'd love the Cardinals to get Pitts. I think we probably need, a tight end. We certainly don't need wide receivers, which is a pity because there's such a talented draft class of them. But I could see us going, I don't know, it's so predictable with Peterson going, but maybe Horn at cornerback if he's still, one of the top cornerbacks would be lovely. But then I'm expecting big things out of Isaiah Simmons. It didn't really happen last year, did it? But him fitting in as safety linebacker, this Swiss Army knife defensive player we were promised, maybe the Cardinals have got plans that maybe mean it isn't as much of a need as it might appear. But you know what, gentlemen? It was an amazing display of how to break down the NFL draft and inform our wonderful listening audience of all the prospects. But guys, as long as I don't, fall ill again and let you all down horribly, the plan is we'll be back in a few days to do it all again, shall we not? But yeah, another good week, gents. See you all again in 7 days.
Stay safe. Thank you.
This is amazing. Woo!
Remember to subscribe and be cool. Tell your friends.
The game is over. The game is over.
There are loads.
Oh,
There's loads of podcasts of everything. And put it this way, we're making a podcast. So,
We're making a podcast. Period of silence. Phil will stop eating and then we'll chat, yeah?
Last one. Shame, really.
Not good at this period of silence stuff, are we?
Could eat more.
have you met Phil?
I'll put myself on mute.
I was.
Deportivo.